Yosemite by John Muir. Chapter 12. How Best to Spend One's Yosemite Time. One-day excursions. If I were so time-poor as to have only one day to spend in Yosemite, I should start at daybreak, say at 3 o'clock in midsummer, with a pocketful of any sort of dry breakfast stuff. For Glacier Point, Sentinel Dome, the head of Illilouette Fall, Nevada Fall, the top of Liberty Cap, Vernal Fall, and the wild boulder-choked River Cañon. The trail leaves the valley at the base of the Sentinel Rock, and as you slowly saunter from point to point along its many accommodating zigzags, nearly all the valley rocks and falls are seen in striking, ever-changing combinations. At an elevation of about 500 feet, a particularly fine, wide-sweeping view down the valley is obtained, past the sheer face of the Sentinel and between the Cathedral Rocks and El Capitan. At a height of about 1,500 feet, the great half-dome comes full in sight, overshadowing every other feature of the valley to the eastward. From Glacier Point you look down 3,000 feet over the edge of its sheer face to the meadows and groves and innumerable yellow pine spires, with the meandering river sparkling and spangling through the midst of them. Across the valley a great telling view is presented of the Royal Arches, North Dome, Indian Cañon, Three Brothers, and El Capitan, with the dome-paved basin of Yosemite Creek and Mount Hoffman in the background. To the east, the half-dome close beside you, looking higher and more wonderful than ever. Southeastward, the Star King, girdled with silver firs, and spacious garden-like basin of the Illilouette, and its deeply sculptured fountain peaks called the Merced Group. And beyond all, marshaled along the eastern horizon, the icy summits on the axis of the range, and broad swaths of forests growing on ancient moraines, while the Nevada, Vernal, and Yosemite Falls are not only full in sight but are distinctly heard, as if one were standing beside them in their spray. The views from the summit of Sentinel Dome are still more extensive and telling. Eastward, the crowds of peaks at the head of the Merced, Tuolumne, and San Joaquin rivers are presented in bewildering array. Westward, the vast forests, yellow foothills, and broad San Joaquin plains, and the coast ranges, hazy and dim in the distance. From Glacier Point, go down the trail into the lower end of the Illilouette Basin, cross Illilouette Creek, and follow it to the fall, where, from an outjutting rock at its head, you will get a fine view of its rejoicing waters and wild cañon and the half-dome. Thence, returning to the trail, follow it to the head of the Nevada Fall. Linger here an hour or two, for not only have you glorious views of the wonderful fall, but of its wild, leaping, exulting rapids, and greater than all, the stupendous scenery into the heart of which the white, passionate river goes wildly thundering, surpassing everything of its kind in the world. After an unmeasured hour or so of this glory, all your body aglow, nerve currents flashing through you never before felt, go to the top of the Liberty Cap. Only a glad saunter now that your legs as well as head and heart are awake and rejoicing with everything. The Liberty Cap, a companion of the half-dome, is sheer and inaccessible on 3 of its sides, but on the east a gentle ice-burnished, juniper-dotted slope extends to the summit, where other wonderful views are displayed, where all are wonderful. The south side and shoulders of Half-Dome and Cloud's Rest, the beautiful little Yosemite Valley and its many domes, the Star King cluster of domes, Sentinel Dome, Glacier Point, and perhaps the most tremendously impressive of all, the views of the hopper-shaped cañon of the river from the head of the Nevada Fall to the head of the valley. Returning to the trail, you descend between the Nevada Fall and the Liberty Cap with fine side views of both the fall and the rock. Pass on through clouds of spray and along the rapids to the head of the Vernal Fall, about a mile below the Nevada. Linger here if night is still distant, for views of this favorite fall and the stupendous rock scenery about it. Then descend a stairway by its side, follow a dim trail through its spray, and a plain along the border of the boulder-dashed rapids, and so back to the wide, tranquil valley. One-day excursions, number 2. Another grand one-day excursion is to the upper Yosemite Fall, the top of the highest of the Three Brothers, called Eagle Peak on the Geological Survey maps, the brow of El Capitan, the head of the Ribbon Fall, across the beautiful Ribbon Creek Basin and back to the valley by the Big Oak Flat wagon road. The trail leaves the valley on the east side of the largest of the earthquake taluses immediately opposite the Sentinel Rock, and as it passes within a few rods of the foot of the great fall, magnificent views are obtained as you approach it and pass through its spray, though when the snow is melting fast you will be well drenched. From the foot of the fall the trail zigzags up a narrow cañon between the fall and a plain mural cliff that is burnished here and there by glacial action. You should stop a while on a flat iron-fenced rock a little below the head of the fall, beside the enthusiastic throng of starry, comet-like waters, to learn something of their strength, their marvelous variety of forms, and above all, their glorious music, gathered and composed from the snowstorms, hail, rain, and windstorms that have fallen on their glacier-sculptured, domy, ridgy basin. Refreshed and exhilarated, you follow your trail way through silver fir and pine woods to Eagle Peak, where the most comprehensive of all the views to be had on the North Wall Heights are displayed. After an hour or two of gazing, dreaming, studying the tremendous topography, etc., trace the rim of the valley to the grand El Capitan Ridge and go down to its brow, where you will gain everlasting impressions of nature's steadfastness and power, combined with ineffable fineness of beauty. Dragging yourself away, go to the head of the Ribbon Fall, thence across the beautiful Ribbon Creek Basin to the Big Oak Flat stage road, and down its fine grades to the valley, enjoying glorious Yosemite scenery all the way to the foot of El Capitan and your camp. 2-day excursions. Number 1. For a 2-day trip, I would go straight to Mount Hoffman, spend the night on the summit, next morning go down by May Lake to Tenaya Lake, and return to the valley by Cloud's Rest and the Nevada and Vernal Falls. As on the foregoing excursion, you leave the valley by the Yosemite Falls Trail and follow it to the Tioga Wagon Road, a short distance east of Porcupine Flat. From that point push straight up to the summit. Mount Hoffman is a mass of gray granite that rises almost in the center of the Yosemite Park, about 8 or 10 miles in a straight line from the valley. Its southern slopes are low and easily climbed, and adorned here and there with castle-like crumbling piles and long jagged crests that look like artificial masonry. But on the north side it is abruptly precipitous and banked with lasting snow. Most of the broad summit is comparatively level and thick sown with crystals, quartz, mica, hornblende, feldspar, granite, zircon, tourmaline, etc., weathered out and strewn closely and loosely as if they had been sown broadcast. Their radiance is fairly dazzling in sunlight, almost hiding the multitude of small flowers that grow among them. At first sight only these radiant crystals are likely to be noticed, but looking closely you discover a multitude of very small gilias, phloxes, mimulus, etc., many of them with more petals than leaves. On the borders of little streams larger plants flourish, lupins, daisies, asters, goldenrod, harebell, mountain columbine, potentilla, astragalus, and a few gentians, with charming heathworts, bryanthus, cassiope, kalmia, vaccinium, in boulder-fringing rings or bank covers. You saunter among the crystals and flowers as if you were walking among stars. From the summit, nearly all the Yosemite Park is displayed like a map. Forests, lakes, meadows, snowy peaks. Northward lies Yosemite's wide basin with its domes and small lakes, shining like larger crystals. Eastward, the rocky, meadowy Tuolumne region, bounded by its snowy peaks in glorious array. Southward, Yosemite, and westward the vast forest. On no other Yosemite Park mountain are you more likely to linger. You will find it a magnificent sky camp. Clumps of dwarf pine and mountain hemlock will furnish resin roots and branches for fuel and light, and the rills, sparkling water. Thousands of little plant people will gaze at your campfire with the crystals and stars, companions and guardians as you lie at rest in the heart of the vast, serene night. The most telling of all the wide Hoffman views is the basin of the Tuolumne, with its meadows, forests, and hundreds of smooth rock waves that appear to be coming, rolling on towards you like high, heaving waves ready to break, and beyond these the great mountains. But best of all are the dawn and the sunrise. No mountain top could be better placed for this most glorious of mountain views, to watch and see the deepening colors of the dawn and the sunbeams streaming through the snowy high Sierra passes, awakening the lakes and crystals, the chilled plant people and winged people, making everything shine and sing in pure glory. With your heart aglow, spangling Lake Tenaya and Lake May will beckon you away for walks on their ice-burnished shores. Leave Tenaya at the west end, cross to the south side of the outlet, and gradually work your way up in an almost straight south direction to the summit of the divide between Tenaya Creek and the main upper Merced River or Nevada Creek, and follow the divide to Cloud's Rest. After a glorious view from the crest of this lofty granite wave, you will find a trail on its western end that will lead you down past Nevada and Vernal Falls to the valley in good time, provided you left your Hoffman Sky Camp early. 2-day excursions. Number 2. Another grand 2-day excursion is the same as the first of the 1-day trips as far as the head of Illilouette Fall. From there, trace the beautiful stream up through the heart of its magnificent forests and gardens to the cañons between the Red and Merced peaks, and pass the night where I camped 41 years ago. Early next morning, visit the small glacier on the north side of Merced Peak, the first of the 65 that I discovered in the Sierra. Glacial phenomena in the Illilouette Basin are on the grandest scale, and in the course of my explorations I found that the cañon and moraines between the Merced and Red Mountains were the most interesting of them all. The path of the vanished glacier shone in many places as if washed with silver, and pushing up the cañon on this bright road I passed lake after lake in solid basins of granite and many a meadow along the cañon stream that links them together. The main lateral moraines that bound the view below the cañon are from 100 to nearly 200 feet high and wonderfully regular, like artificial embankments covered with a magnificent growth of silver fir and pine. But this garden and forest luxuriance is speedily left behind, and patches of bryanthus, cassiope, and Arctic willows begin to appear. The small lakes, which a few miles down the valley are so richly bordered with flowery meadows, have, at an elevation of 10,000 feet, only small brown mats of carex, leaving bare rocks around more than half their shores. Yet, strange to say, amid all this Arctic repression the mountain pine on ledges and buttresses of Red Mountain seems to find the climate best suited to it. Some specimens that I measured were over 100 feet high and 24 feet in circumference, showing hardly a trace of severe storms, looking as fresh and vigorous as the giants of the lower zones. Evening came on just as I got fairly into the main cañon. It is about a mile wide and a little less than 2 miles long. The crumbling spurs of Red Mountain bound it on the north, the somber cliffs of Merced Mountain on the south, and a deeply serrated, splintered ridge curving around from mountain to mountain shuts it in on the east. My camp was on the brink of one of the lakes in a thicket of mountain hemlock, partly sheltered from the wind. Early next morning I set out to trace the ancient glacier to its head. Passing around the north shore of my camp lake, I followed the main stream from one lakelet to another. The dwarf pines and hemlocks disappeared, and the stream was bordered with icicles. The main lateral moraines that extended from the mouth of the cañon are continued in straggling masses along the walls. Tracing the streams back to the highest of its lakes, I noticed a deposit of fine gray mud, something like the mud corn from a grindstone. This suggested its glacial origin, for the stream that was carrying it issued from a raw-looking moraine that seemed to be in process of formation. It is about 60 to over 100 feet high in front, with a slope of about 38 degrees. Climbing to the top of it, I discovered a very small but well-characterized glacier swooping down from the shadowy cliffs of the mountain to its terminal moraine. The ice appeared on all the lower portion of the glacier. Farther up it was covered with snow. The uppermost crevasse, or bergschrund, was from 12 to 14 feet wide. The melting snow and ice formed a network of rills that ran gracefully down the surface of the glacier, merrily singing in their shining channels. After this discovery I made excursions all over the High Sierra, and discovered that what at first sight looked like snowfields were in great part glaciers, which were completing the sculpture of the summit peaks. Rising early, which will be easy, as your bed will be rather cold and you will not be able to sleep much anyhow after visiting the glacier, climb the Red Mountain and enjoy the magnificent views from the summit. I counted 40 lakes from one standpoint at this mountain, and the views to the westward over the Illilouette Basin, the most superbly forested of all the basins whose waters rain into Yosemite, and those of the Yosemite rocks, especially the Half Dome and the upper part of the north wall, are very fine. But of course, far the most imposing view is the vast array of snowy peaks along the axis of the range. Then, from the top of this peak, light and free, and exhilarated with mountain air and mountain beauty, you should run lightly down the northern slope of the mountain, descend the cañon between the Red and Gray Mountains, and then northward along the bases of Gray Mountain and Mount Clark, and go down into the head of Little Yosemite, and thence down past the Nevada and Vernal Falls to the valley. A truly glorious 2-day trip. A 3-day excursion. The best 3-day excursion, as far as I can see, is the same as the first of the 2-day trips until you reach Lake Tenaya. There, instead of returning to the valley, follow the Tioga Road around the northwest side of the lake, over to the Tuolumne Meadows, and up to the west base of Mount Dana. Leave the road there and make straight for the highest point of the timberline between Mounts Dana and Gibbs, and camp there. On the morning of the 3rd day, go to the top of Mount Dana in time for the glory of the dawn and the sunrise over the gray Mono Desert and the sublime forest of the High Sierra peaks. When you leave the mountain, go far enough down the north side for a view of the Dana Glacier, and then make your way back to the Tioga Road. Follow it along the Tuolumne Meadows to the crossing of Bud Creek, where you will find the Sunrise Trail branching off up the mountainside through the forest in a southwesterly direction past the west side of Cathedral Peak, which will lead you down to the valley by the Vernal and Nevada Falls. If you are a good walker, you can leave the trail where it begins to descend a steep slope in the Silver Fir woods, and bear off to the right and make straight for the top of Cloud's Rest. The walking is good and almost level, and from the west end of Cloud's Rest take the Cloud's Rest Trail, which will lead direct to the valley by the Nevada and Vernal Falls. To anyone not desperately time-poor, this trip should have 4 days instead of 3. Camping the second night at the Soda Springs, thence to Mount Dana, and return to Soda Springs, camping the third night there, thence by the Sunrise Trail to Cathedral Peak, visiting the beautiful Cathedral Lake, which lies about a mile to the west of Cathedral Peak, eating your luncheon, and thence to Cloud's Rest in the valley as above. This is one of the most interesting of all the comparatively short trips that can be made in the whole Yosemite region. Not only do you see all the grandest of the Yosemite rocks and waterfalls in the High Sierra with their glaciers, glacier lakes and glacier meadows, etc., but sections of the magnificent silver fir, two-leaved pine, dwarf pine zones, with the principal alpine flowers and shrubs, especially sods of dwarf vaccinium covered with flowers and fruit, though less than an inch high, broad mats of dwarf willow scarce an inch high with catkins that rise straight from the ground, and glorious beds of blue gentians, grandeur enough and beauty enough for a lifetime. Yosemite by John Muir. Chapter 12. How Best to Spend One's Yosemite Time. The Upper Tuolumne Excursion. We come now to the grandest of all the Yosemite excursions, one that requires at least 2 or 3 weeks. The best time to make it is from about the middle of July. The visitor, entering the Yosemite in July, has the advantage of seeing the falls, not perhaps in their very flood prime, but next thing to it, while the glacier meadows will be in their glory and the snow on the mountains will be firm enough to make climbing safe. Long ago I made these Sierra trips, carrying only a sackful of bread with a little tea and sugar, and was thus independent and free. But now that trails or carriage roads lead out of the valley in almost every direction, it is easy to take a pack animal, so that the luxury of a blanket and a supply of food can easily be had. The best way to leave the valley will be by the Yosemite Fall Trail, camping the first night on the Tioga Road opposite the east end of the Hoffman Range. Next morning climb Mount Hoffman, thence push on past Tenaya Lake into the Tuolumne Meadows and establish a central camp near the Soda Springs, from which glorious excursions can be made at your leisure. For here in this upper Tuolumne Valley is the widest, smoothest, most serenely spacious, and in every way the most delightful summer pleasure park in all the High Sierra. And since it is connected with Yosemite by 2 good trails, and a fairly good carriage road that passes between Yosemite and Mount Hoffman, it is also the most accessible. It is in the heart of the High Sierra, east of Yosemite, 8,500 to 9,000 feet above the level of the sea. The gray, picturesque Cathedral Range bounds it on the south. A similar range, or spur, the highest peak of which is Mount Conness on the north. The noble Mounts Dana, Gibbs, Mammoth, Lyell, McClure, and others on the axis of the range on the east, a heaving, billowing crowd of glacier-polished rocks, and Mount Hoffman on the west. Down through the open, sunny meadow levels of the valley flows the Tuolumne River, fresh and cool from its many glacial fountains, the highest of which are the glaciers that lie on the north sides of Mount Lyell and Mount McClure. Along the river a series of beautiful glacier meadows extends with but little interruption from the lower end of the valley to its head, a distance of about 12 miles, forming charming sauntering grounds from which the glorious mountains may be enjoyed, as they look down in divine serenity over the dark forests that clothe their bases. Narrow strips of pine woods cross the meadow carpet from side to side, and it is somewhat roughened here and there by moraine boulders and dead trees, brought down from the heights by snow avalanches. But for miles and miles it is so smooth and level that 100 horsemen may ride abreast over it. The main lower portion of the meadows is about 4 miles long and from 1/4 to half a mile wide, but the width of the valley is, on an average, about 8 miles. Tracing the river, we find that it forks a mile above the Soda Springs, the main fork turning southward to Mount Lyell, the other eastward to Mount Dana and Mount Gibbs. Along both, fork strips of meadow extend almost to their heads. The most beautiful portions of the meadows are spread over lake basins, which have been filled up by deposits from the river. A few of these river lakes still exist, but they are now shallow and are rapidly approaching extinction. The sod in most places is exceedingly fine and silky and free from weeds and bushes, while charming flowers abound, especially gentians, dwarf daisies, potentillas, and the pink bells of the dwarf vaccinium. On the banks of the river and its tributaries, cassiope and bryanthus may be found, where the sod curls over stream banks and around boulders. The principal grass of these meadows is a delicate calamagrostis with very slender filiform leaves, and when it is in flower the ground seems to be covered with a faint purple mist, the stems of the panicles being so fine that they are almost invisible, and offer no appreciable resistance in walking through them. Along the edges of the meadows, beneath the pines and throughout the greater part of the valley, tall ribbon-leaved grasses grow in abundance, chiefly bromus, triticum, and agrostis. In October, the nights are frosty, and then the meadows at sunrise, when every leaf is laden with crystals, are a fine sight. The days are still warm and calm, and bees and butterflies continue to waver and hum about the late-blooming flowers until the coming of the snow, usually in November. Storm then follows storm in quick succession, burying the meadows to a depth of from 10 to 20 feet, while magnificent avalanches descend through the forest from the laden heights, depositing huge piles of snow mixed with uprooted trees and boulders. In the open sunshine the snow usually lasts until the end of June, but the new season's vegetation is not generally in bloom until late in July. Perhaps the best all-round excursion time after winters of average snowfall is from the middle of July to the middle or end of August. The snow is then melted from the woods, and southern slopes of the mountains and the meadows and gardens are in their glory, while the weather is mostly all reviving, exhilarating sunshine. The few clouds that rise now and then, and the showers they yield, are only enough to keep everything fresh and fragrant. The groves about the Soda Springs are favorite camping grounds on account of the cold, pleasant-tasting water charged with carbonic acid, and because of the views of the mountains across the meadow, the Glacier Monument, Cathedral Peak, Cathedral Spires, Unicorn Peak, and a series of ornamental nameless companions, rising in striking forms and nearness above a dense forest growing on the left lateral moraine of the ancient Tuolumne Glacier, which, broad, deep, and far-reaching, exerted vast influence on the scenery of this portion of the Sierra. But there are fine camping grounds all along the meadows, and one may move from grove to grove every day all summer, enjoying new homes and new beauty to satisfy every roving desire for change. There are 5 main capital excursions to be made from here: to the summits of Mount Dana, Lyell, and Conness, and through the Bloody Cañon Pass to Mono Lake and the volcanoes, and down the Tuolumne Cañon. at least as far as the foot of the wonderful series of river cataracts. All of these excursions are sure to be made memorable with joyful, health-giving experiences, but perhaps none of them will be remembered with keener delight than the days spent in sauntering on the broad velvet lawns by the river, sharing the sky with the mountains and trees, gaining something of their strength and peace. The excursion to the top of Mount Dana is a very easy one, for though the mountain is 13,000 feet high, the ascent from the west side is so gentle and smooth that one may ride a mule to the very summit. Across many a busy stream, from meadow to meadow, lies your flowery way. Mountains all about you, few of them hidden by irregular foregrounds. Gradually ascending, other mountains come into sight, peak rising above peak, with their snow and ice in endless variety of grouping and sculpture. Now your attention is turned to the moraines, sweeping in beautiful curves from the hollows and cañons, now to the granite waves and pavements rising here and there above the healthy sod, polished 1,000 years ago and still shining. Toward the base of the mountain you note the dwarfing of the trees, until at a height of about 11,000 feet you find patches of the tough, white-barked pine, pressed so flat by the 10 or 20 feet of snow piled upon them every winter for centuries, that you may walk over them as if walking on a shaggy rug. And if curious about such things, you may discover specimens of this hardy tree mountaineer, not more than 4 feet high and about as many inches in diameter at the ground, that are from 200 to 400 years old, still holding bravely to life, making the most of their slender summers, shaking their tasseled needles in the breeze right cheerily, drinking the thin sunshine and maturing their fine purple cones, as if they meant to live forever. The general view from the summit is one of the most extensive and sublime to be found in all the range. To the eastward you gaze far out over the desert plains and mountains of the Great Basin, range beyond range extending with soft outlines, blue and purple in the distance. More than 6,000 feet below you lies Lake Mono, 10 miles in diameter from north to south, and 14 from west to east, lying bare in the treeless desert like a disk of burnished metal, though at times it is swept by mountain storm winds and streaked with foam. To the southward there is a well-defined range of pale gray extinct volcanoes, and though the highest of them rises nearly 2,000 feet above the lake, you can look down from here into their circular cup-like craters, from which a comparatively short time ago ashes and cinders were showered over the surrounding sage plains and glacier-laden mountains. To the westward the landscape is made up of exceedingly strong, gray, glaciated domes and ridge waves, most of them comparatively low, but the largest high enough to be called mountains, separated by cañons and darkened with lines and fields of forest, Cathedral Peak and Mount Hoffman in the distance, small lakes and innumerable meadows in the foreground. Northward and southward the great snowy mountains, marshaled along the axis of the range, are seen in all their glory, crowded together in some places like trees in groves, making landscapes of wild, extravagant, bewildering magnificence, yet calm and silent as the sky. Some 8 glaciers are in sight. One of these is the Dana Glacier on the north side of the mountain, lying at the foot of a precipice about 1,000 feet high, with a lovely pale green lake a little below it. This is one of the many small shrunken remnants of the vast glacial system of the Sierra that once filled the hollows and valleys of the mountains and covered all the lower ridges below the immediate summit fountains, flowing to right and left away from the axis of the range, lavishly fed by the snows of the glacial period. In the excursion to Mount Lyell, the immediate base of the mountain is easily reached on meadow walks along the river. Turning to the southward above the forks of the river, you enter the narrow Lyell branch of the valley, narrow enough and deep enough to be called a cañon. It is about 8 miles long and from 2,000 to 3,000 feet deep. The flat meadow bottom is from about 300 to 200 yards wide, with gently curved margins about 50 yards wide from which rise the simple massive walls of gray granite at an angle of about 33 degrees, mostly timbered with a light growth of pine and streaked in many places with avalanche channels. Toward the upper end of the cañon, the Sierra crown comes in sight, forming a finely balanced picture framed by the massive cañon walls. In the foreground, when the grass is in flower, you have the purple meadow willow thickets on the river banks. In the middle distance, huge swelling bosses of granite that form the base of the general mass of the mountain, with fringing lines of dark woods marking the lower curves, smoothly snow-clad, except in the autumn. If you wish to spend 2 days on the Lyell trip, you will find a good campground on the east side of the river, about a mile above a fine cascade that comes down over the cañon wall in telling style and makes good camp music. From here to the top of the mountains is usually an easy day's work. At one place near the summit, careful climbing is necessary, but it is not so dangerous or difficult as to deter anyone of ordinary skill, while the views are glorious. To the northward are Mammoth Mountain, Mount Gibbs, Dana, Warren, Conness, and others, unnumbered and unnamed. To the southeast, the indescribably wild and jagged range of Mount Ritter and the Minarets. Southwestward stretches the dividing range between the North Fork of the San Joaquin and the Merced, uniting with the Obelisk or Merced group of peaks that form the main fountains of the Illilouette branch of the Merced, and to the northwestward extends the Cathedral Spur. These spurs, like distant ranges, meet at your feet. Therefore you look at them mostly in the direction of their extension, and their peaks seem to be massed and crowded against one another, while immense amphitheaters, cañons, and subordinate ridges with their wealth of lakes, glaciers, and snowfields maze and cluster between them. In making the ascent in June or October, the glacier is easily crossed, for then its snow mantle is smooth, or mostly melted off. But in midsummer the climbing is exceedingly tedious, because the snow is then weathered into curious and beautiful blades, sharp and slender, and set on edge in a leaning position. They lean towards the head of the glacier and extend across from side to side in regular order in a direction at right angles to the direction of the greatest declivity, the distance between the crests being about 2 or 3 feet, and the depth of the troughs between them about 3 feet. A more interesting problem than a walk over a glacier, thus sculptured and adorned, is seldom presented to the mountaineer. The Lyell Glacier is about a mile wide and less than a mile long, but presents nevertheless all the essential characters of a large river-like glaciers, moraines, earth bands, blue veins, crevasses, etc., while the streams that issue from it are, of course, turbid, with rock mud showing its grinding action on its bed. And it is all the more interesting since it is the highest and most enduring remnant of the great Tuolumne Glacier, whose traces are still distinct 50 miles away, and whose influence on the landscape was so profound. The McClure Glacier, once a tributary of the Lyell, is smaller. 38 years ago I set a series of stakes in it to determine its rate of motion. Towards the end of summer, in the middle of the glacier, it was only a little over an inch in 24 hours. The trip to Mono from the Soda Springs can be made in a day, but many days may profitably be spent near the shores of the lake, on its islands, and about the volcanoes. In making the trip down the big Tuolumne Cañon, animals may be led as far as a small grassy forested lake basin that lies below the crossing of the Virginia Creek Trail, and from this point anyone accustomed to walking on earthquake boulders carpeted with cañon chaparral can easily go down as far as the big cascades and return to camp in one day. Many, however, are not able to do this, and it is better to go leisurely, prepared to camp anywhere and enjoy the marvelous grandeur of the place. The cañon begins near the lower end of the meadows and extends to the Hetch Hetchy Valley, a distance of about 18 miles, though it will seem much longer to anyone who scrambles through it. It is from 1,200 to about 5,000 feet deep and is comparatively narrow, but there are several roomy, park-like openings in it, and throughout its whole extent Yosemite natures are displayed on a grand scale. Domes, El Capitan rocks, gables, sentinels, royal arches, glacier points, cathedral spires, etc. There is even a half-dome among its wealth of rock forms, though far less sublime than the Yosemite half-dome. Its falls and cascades are innumerable. The sheer falls, except when the snow is melting in early spring, are quite small in volume as compared with those of Yosemite and Hetch Hetchy, though in any other country many of them would be regarded as wonders. But it is the cascades or sloping falls on the main river that are the crowning glory of the cañon, and these in volume, extent, and variety surpass those of any other cañon in the Sierra. The most showy and interesting of them are mostly in the upper part of the cañon, above the point of entrance of Cathedral Creek and Hoffman Creek. For miles the river is one wild, exulting, onrushing mass of snowy purple bloom, spreading over glacial waves of granite without any definite channel, gliding in magnificent silver plumes, dashing and foaming through huge boulder dams, leaping high into the air in wheel-like whirls, displaying glorious enthusiasm, tossing from side to side, doubling, glinting, singing, in exuberance of mountain energy. Everyone who is anything of a mountaineer should go on through the entire length of the cañon, coming out by Hetch Hetchy. There is not a dull step all the way. With wide variations, it is a Yosemite Valley from end to end. Beside these main, far-reaching, much-seeing excursions from the main central camp, there are numberless lovely little saunters and scrambles, and a dozen or so not so very little. Among the best of these are to Lambert and Fairview domes, to the topmost spires of Cathedral Peak, and to those of the North Church, around the base of which you pass on your way to Mount Conness, to one of the very loveliest of the glacier meadows embedded in the pine woods about 3 miles north of the Soda Springs, where 42 years ago I spent 6 weeks. It trends east and west, and you can find it easily by going past the base of Lambert's Dome to Dog Lake, and thence up northward through the woods about a mile or so, to the shining rock waves full of ice-burnished feldspar crystals at the foot of the meadows to Lake Tenaya. And last but not least, a rather long and very hearty scramble down by the end of the meadow along the Tioga Road toward Lake Tenaya to the crossing of Cathedral Creek, where you turn off and trace the creek down to its confluence with the Tuolumne. This is a genuine scramble much of the way, but one of the most wonderfully telling in its glacial rock forms and inscriptions. If you stop and fish at every tempting lake and stream you come to, a whole month or even 2 months will not be too long for this grand High Sierra excursion. My own Sierra trip was 10 years long. Other trips from the valley. Short carriage trips are usually made in the early morning to Mirror Lake to see its wonderful reflections of the Half Dome and Mount Watkins, and in the afternoon many ride down the valley to see the Bridal Veil rainbows, or up the river cañon to see those of the vernal fall, where, standing in the spray, not minding getting drenched, you may see what are called round rainbows, where the 2 ends of the ordinary bow are lengthened and meet at your feet, forming a complete circle which is broken and united again and again as determined by the wafting, varying wafts of spray. A few ambitious scramblers climb to the top of the Sentinel Rock, Others walk or ride down the valley and up to the once famous Inspiration Point for a last grand view, while a good many appreciative tourists who slave only a day or two do no climbing or riding, but spend their time sauntering on the meadows by the river, watching the falls and the relay of light and shade among the rocks from morning to night, perhaps gaining more than those who make haste up the trails in large noisy parties. Those who have unlimited time find something worthwhile all the year round on every accessible part of the vast, deeply sculptured walls. At least so I have found it after making the valley my home for many years. Here are a few specimens selected from my own short trips which walkers may find useful. 1. Up the river Cañon, across the bridge between the Vernal and the Nevada Falls, through chaparral beds and boulders to the shoulder of Half Dome, along the top of the shoulder to the dome itself, down by a crumbling slot gully and close along the base of the tremendous split front, the most awfully impressive sheer precipice view I ever found in all my cañon wanderings. Thence up the east shoulder and along the ridge to Cloud's Rest, a glorious sunset, then a grand starry run back home to my cabin, down through the junipers, down through the firs, now in black shadows, now in white light, past roaring Nevada and Vernal, flowering ghost-like beneath their huge frowning cliffs, down the dark, gloomy cañon, through the pines of the valley, dreamily murmuring in their calm, breezy sleep, a fine wild little excursion for good legs and good eyes, so much sun, moon, and starshine in it, and sublime, up and down rhythmical, glacial topography. Another to the head of Yosemite Fall by Indian Cañon, thence up the Yosemite Creek, tracing it all the way to its highest sources back of Mount Hoffman, then a wide sweep around the head of its dome-paved basin, passing its many little lakes and bogs, gardens and groves, trilling, warbling rills, and back by the Fall Cañon. This was one of my Sabbath walks, run-and-slide excursions long ago before any trail had been made on the north side of the valley. Another fine trip was up bright and early by Avalanche Cañon to Glacier Point, along the rugged south wall, tracing all its far outs and ins to the head of the Bridal Veil Fall, thence back home, bright and late by a brushy, bouldering slope between cathedral rocks and cathedral spires, and along the level valley floor. This was one of my long, bright day, bright night walks 30 or 40 years ago, when, like river and ocean currents, time flowed undivided, uncounted, a fine, free, sauntery, scrambly, botanical, beauty-filled ramble. The walk up the valley was made glorious by the marvelous brightness of the morning star. So great was her light she made every tree cast a well-defined shadow on the smooth, sandy ground. Everybody who visits Yosemite wants to see the famous big trees. Before the railroad was constructed, all 3 of the stage roads that entered the valley passed through a grove of these trees, by the way, namely the Tuolumne, Merced, and Mariposa groves. The Tuolumne Grove was passed on the Big Oak Flat Road, the Merced Grove by the Coulterville Road, and the Mariposa Grove by the Raymond and Wawona Road. Now, to see any one of these groves, a special trip has to be made. Most visitors go to the Mariposa Grove, the largest of the 3. On this sequoia trip you see not only the 3 giant big trees, but magnificent forests of silver fir, sugar pine, yellow pine, libocedrus, and Douglas spruce. The trip need not require more than 2 days, spending a night in a good hotel at Wawona, a beautiful place on the South Fork of the Merced River, and returning to the valley or to El Portal, the terminus of the railroad. This extra trip by stage costs $15. All the High Sierra excursions that I have sketched cost from $1 a week to anything you like. None of mine when I was exploring the Sierra cost over $1 a week. Most of them less. End of chapter 12.